Have you ever worked with someone who just rubs you up the wrong way? Who, no matter how hard you try, you just can't seem to get along with them? Well, today's episode is absolutely for you. I know I've had that person, and maybe I've even been that person. I'm your host, Aoife O'Brien. This is the award winning Happier at Work podcast, the career and culture podcast for people first leaders and teams. And today's guest brings so many insights all about how to get along with just about anyone. So it's about understanding ourselves, growing in self awareness, and also understanding other people and their behaviors and seeing things from their perspective. So tune in and let me know what you think of today's episode. Get involved in the conversation, leave a comment below in your favorite podcast platform, or don't forget to leave a rating or a review, or join in the conversation over on LinkedIn. Catherine, you're so welcome to the Happier at Work podcast. I know we've had a couple of brief email conversations rather than actual conversations before this, and I'm so interested in your work, but I'd love to know a little bit about the history. Like, how did you get into doing what it is that you do, and what really piqued your interest in the area?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Aoife. And it's lovely to be here, by the way, and great to meet you in person or almost in person. So I'm a leadership coach. I work with Airbus. I've also in recent years worked with Google and Audi and other big companies. I started my career in HR. So after university, I started with Ford Motor Company in HR, then Mercury Communications, and then I went to ICL, which became owned by Fujitsu, a company that most people have heard of these days. And it was when I was at ICL that I moved from mainstream HR into leadership development, which I think is where my main interests lie, where my talents lie, and so on. So I was in leadership development in ICL, then took a career break because of my husband's job. So we lived in Cairo in Egypt for 3 years, and then Brazil in Rio for 2 years. And I think that I was already interested in psychology and in behavior, but that got me even more interested. You know, what influences how we behave? So different cultures, obviously national cultures, religion, your upbringing, all these things influence behavior. So I think those experiences of living abroad got me more interested. So then when we came back from Brazil, which was over 20 years ago now, I set up my own company. I also had two children. So, you know, you're juggling all the family stuff as well as the work stuff. And used to do a lot of assessment at first, then qualified as a coach. I also did a master's degree in organizational behavior. And yeah, built from there really. So what I mainly do now is coaching and also team building. I wrote my first book, How to Get On with Anyone, in 2018. Well, it came out in 2018. And that book is about communication and about relationships and how to build better relationships with people at work or at home. And I think one of the prompts that made me write that, I think, yes, partly it was, you know, my life experience and living abroad and all those things, but also it was sort of just noticing differences, noticing conflict between me and my husband, for example, where he has a certain communication style, quite a directing style. I have a more informing style, and that can lead to lots of misunderstandings.
Mm.
And I'd come across this model of behavior, a framework of behavior called interaction styles. Came across that in about 2012, I think. Started using it, trying it out with coaching clients, trying it out in team building workshops, and found that people got it really easily and could
Mm.
start applying it straight away. And I thought, this is just so good, so helpful to people in their lives at work and at home, that I wanted to share it more widely. And if you work in a big company and you're a manager, your company will pay for you to go and, you know, do all this self-insight, self-awareness stuff, learn how to lead and motivate others and all of that. But if you're not in a big company, you often don't get a lot of training or help. And I just thought this stuff was so valuable that I wanted to share it, which is what brought me to write the first book, How to Get On with Anyone. So that came out 2018, published by Pearson. It's since last year in 2024 came out in a second edition with extra material, you know, a whole new chapter on leadership, whole new chapter on inclusion, and also lots of stuff on virtual communication, because in the meantime, since the first edition, COVID had happened.
A big change happened in the world. Yes.
Exactly. And everyone's working from home or
Mm,
hybrid working. And so that virtual communication side needed a bit more discussion, I think, and advice and guidance. So that's how I came to write that first book, based on really trying this stuff out with different groups of people. And then I think the second book, Motivation, the Ultimate Guide to Leading Your Team, that really came about because of COVID, as in I had more time. Because
mm,
suddenly, I wasn't doing as much coaching or as much going out and delivering workshops and things. So I had the time, and I thought, understanding what motivates you, how you're motivated, what motivates you, how, if you're a manager, how to motivate other people is really, really important. And we don't discuss it enough.
mm,
So many people are not happy at work, they're unhappy in their jobs. They're not getting what they need from their colleagues or from their managers. And again, it was an area that I'd over the years gained a lot of, knowledge, academic knowledge partly, but experience in working with people. And again, I just wanted to share that more widely, and in particular, share all the practical tools,
mm.
and tips and so on, the practical stuff. I often see my role and the work that I do as turning the theory into practice. How
Yeah.
do I actually do that?
Yeah.
Most managers have heard of Maslow,
Yeah.
but you say, okay, who's heard of Maslow? They put their hands up. Okay, who can explain to me what self-actualization means? Nobody puts their
No
hands up.
one.
So,
Yes.
so
Yeah.
it's trying to make things more doable and
Yeah.
actionable,
Yeah.
really.
That it's interesting you say that, Catherine, because that's something I found when I was doing my master's as well. There was a time in particular that I remembered from before I became a people leader for the first time, and I was having management development training, which is unheard of. Like, they're training people before they even become managers. And I think a lot of times these days, people become managers, and I think 80% or something have never been trained in how to lead people. But
Mm.
this is back, about yeah, probably almost 20 years ago now, when I was being trained in this stuff, and we were taught about this thing called situational leadership. And I was like, wow, this is
Yeah,
groundbreaking stuff. This is amazing. I couldn't believe it. And when I did the masters, I found out that that stuff had come about in the 1990s. Like,
yeah,
I was like, how is it that we're still talking about situational leadership when it's more than 30 years old? That I thought it was really groundbreaking in the early 2000s. And like, how can we get this research or this information into the hands of the people who need it, and how can they implement it in a practical way in their day-to-day roles? So that was kind of something that really struck me when I was doing the masters. Like, there was so much rich
yeah,
information out there, but it's not actually shared in a way that people who need it can really digest.
yeah,
um
yeah.
so
That is so true.
yeah.
And in fact, in the introduction to one of my books, I've more or less written what you've just said. How can you turn all this fantastic stuff that's in academia into
Yeah.
practical stuff? And managers actually, although I would say both my books are quite easy to read and they're very practical, these days people don't even want to read books.
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
a podcast is great. And I love what you're doing with the Happier at Work podcast, because, people when they're driving home from work or something can listen
They
to
can
some of this stuff,
listen.
and some of
Yeah.
it will go in, it'll be
Yeah.
helpful. But yeah, it's so turning all that theory, all that content into something that people can actually do something about is
Yeah.
is is what I'm trying to do, really.
Yeah. And I think
Yeah.
maybe this is what we make today's podcast all about. And I know that you've listened to some of my previous podcast episodes talking about need satisfaction and motivation. And so I'd love to dive into that in a little bit of detail first, because there are so many other podcast episodes that touch on it. So we can kind of direct people back to those previous episodes. And then we can take maybe a deeper dive into how to get along with anyone, which I
Mhm.
think everyone can relate to. And, understanding how to get on with people both in our personal and in our professional lives, and maybe what are the things that drive us demented, and what can we do for ourselves to understand ourselves a little bit better around that. How does that sound?
That sounds great. Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Brilliant. So on the needs, you've listened
Mm.
to, I know there was one particular episode with Dr. Mark Fabian where we talked about this idea of self-determination theory. And in the interest of not kind of getting too academic-y, maybe we can touch on some of the elements of that and how it relates to your book on motivation. Like, how do you see
Mm.
self-determination theory when it comes to motivation? And I think people, maybe it's a concept that's really misunderstood, and we get the idea of the carrot and the stick, and trying to motivate people by fear rather than by desire, and the difference between moving towards from something or moving, towards
Yeah.
pleasure versus away from pain, and things like that.
Mm.
Can you explain maybe
Mm.
in summary what the book touches on?
Yes. Okay. So I think in a way, my starting point for a manager is to say, rather than asking yourself, how can I get the most out of people? Because that's what we used to say to managers. That's what you've got to think. How do you get the most out of people? Instead of that, they need to think, how can I support people to perform at their best?
Mm,
So you're starting from a different point. And then if you know that we have these needs, and I think the research of Ryan and Deci on self-determination theory is, it's well proved that we
mm,
have these needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Some people use slightly different labels for those things. So how can I, as a manager, help people meet their needs for those things? So if you take competence as an example,
mm,
okay, if we all have this need to feel that we're competent and respected for our skills and our talents and so on, what can I as a manager do? So one of the things, if I'm a manager, I might want to do is, have regular one-to-ones with people. Sit down, have a chat. How are things going? What's the best thing that's happened this week? What hasn't gone so well this week? What could you do differently? Those sorts of conversations that, first of all, showing that you care about them, but are also helping them think through, that you're giving them the time and the space to think through, yeah, actually, perhaps I'm not so good at X, or perhaps I could have done better on Y. And you discuss and help them. So yeah, how can you as a manager help people feel more competent? So one of the other things I often advise people to do is, I call it do and review. So whenever somebody's done something, maybe they've been in a meeting, they've had a customer call, they've made a presentation or written a report, sit down with them just for 5 minutes and, review it. Okay, you've done it now. Let's review it. What went well? What
mm,
didn't go so well? What would you do differently next time? And I, as your manager, I might advise you on what you might do differently next time as well. So it's a sort of that coaching approach to management.
yeah.
So yeah, so thinking about, you know, those are the sorts of things you can do to build people's competence, recognizing there are individual differences. You've
Mm,
mentioned situational leadership. So some people will need more support and regular chats with you than others. Some people almost need a daily chat.
mm,
Some people might not want to have a conversation like this more than once a week or even once a month. So it's, recognizing that. So that's competence. Relatedness, which I tend to call connection rather than
yeah,
relatedness. But,
yeah, yeah.
that's our human need that we all share, to have connections with other people, to feel that we belong, that we're liked, that, people, yeah, just respect us and want to spend time with us. So that relatedness, what can managers do for that? Well, I think this is really important, particularly in this time of hybrid working, that managers do spend some time to make those connections between them and the individuals, but also encouraging connections and friendships in the team. So,
Mm,
for example, if you're having meetings online, then open them early so people can have a chat before you
mm,
get into the business of the meeting. If you've got bad news to impart, do it face to face if you possibly
mm,
can.
yeah.
Some organizations that are mainly have people working from home, once a month they get everyone into the office and have a team meeting, and all these different things you can do
Mm,
to enable people to meet those needs for connection and relatedness. And then autonomy, again, we're all different. Some people will want more autonomy or freedom than others, but giving people a bit of choice about when they work or how they do their jobs or where they work and so on, or delegating things to them that they have the skills to do and would like
mm.
to do. Those are some of the ways you can meet people's need for autonomy.
I
Um,
think in the autonomy in particular, it's a tough one because it's getting that balance right between being a micromanager, and you don't want to be a micromanager,
mm,
but then relinquishing some of that control and letting people make mistakes and figure things out on their own, but
Yeah.
with the knowledge that you're there to support them. But I think sometimes as individuals, as leaders, we might feel that we don't want to allow someone to fail, or that we need to monitor
Mm.
in we want to have more control than maybe what they would like us to have. So I think the individual differences in people's need for autonomy varies quite a bit from career stages
Yeah.
and individual differences as well.
Yes. And I think as a manager, you have to think, am I trying to control, am I micromanaging to fit my needs or theirs?
Yeah,
And often it's to fit yourself because you don't quite
exactly.
trust them
Yes,
and
yeah.
whatever, rather than helping them. So, but you have to do it by discussion,
Mm,
sit down with somebody. Would you like more control over this, or would you like to take on that project, or how do you feel about this, or do they just feel that they're being dumped on and you're just giving them
yes.
stuff that you don't want to do? So it's
Yeah.
having that sensitivity with the individual to
This is
manage it
it.
properly.
On the connection piece, and that's a term that I like to use as well. The relatedness, maybe it just sounds a bit academic-y. It's like,
Mm,
who says relatedness in every day? You might say connection, but
mm,
I like to talk about, and this is where we kind of debated about like where should that actually sit. I like to extend it to be making connections between what I as an individual am working on a day-to-day basis and what the team, the department
mm,
or the organization is trying to achieve, or the impact that I'm having, and seeing a link
yeah,
between those two things for me I think is really important. And it's like I always say, if there's one thing that you take away, it's making that explicit link between the importance of the work that you're doing and the outcomes that you're achieving to the people who are receiving your work, or the
mm-hmm,
impact that it's having. Any thoughts
mm.
on where that might fit in with the model? Does it belong with connection? Is it something completely separate? Do people generally need to have that? Do you think like
Yeah.
it's because I know with the three needs for autonomy, relatedness, and competence, they're universal needs. We all have
Mm,
those, but
mm.
this kind of, is this a separate thing? How would you kind of place
Okay, yeah.
that?
I tend to think it's slightly separate. So
Mm,
rather than seeing it as part of connection, I see it as purpose,
yeah,
really. And you need that as well. And I don't think that completely comes out in self-determination theory.
yeah,
Although the way I see it is that um, fulfilling my needs gives me a sense of purpose. So for me personally, I have quite a high need for competence.
mm,
And that means I like to learn, I like to achieve things, I like to do things as well as I possibly can. And that need, fulfilling that need is part of my sense of purpose in a way, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah,
So, I mean, I'm learning, so outside work, I'm learning Spanish at the moment. A few years ago, I took up golf and I enjoy that act of sort of learning and becoming more competent in those areas.
yeah,
So I think those activities then give me that sense of purpose and link with my need for competence. But I
mm,
also think that we've got another type of purpose as well. So meeting your needs, that's the more sort of longer term enduring that goes through your life. But I think you have short term purposes as well.
mm,
So, a few years ago, my purpose was to write a book. And
yeah,
that's what got me up in the morning. That kept
yeah,
me, I was motivated. I wanted to get on and finish the book sort of thing. And I think at work, when you're part of a team, I think I agree with you that you definitely need to feel that your job, the purpose of your job is something important. It
mm,
matters whether you turn up and do it in the morning or if you don't turn up,
yeah,
it's so I have a sense of purpose in my work. Also, I can link that to the wider team. If I'm part of a team, what is our purpose as a team? And where do I fit into that? And how can I help my colleagues who are all perhaps doing slightly different things, but how can I help them meet their purposes as a team? And then how does that fit into the wider organizational purpose? So I really think that's important. And, there's lots of evidence that when people retire from work, they go back to work or they find other things that are a bit like work to give
mm,
them that sense of purpose.
yeah,
And there's some neuroscientists that I quote sometimes that talk about having activities. You need to have stuff to do, But it's not just about being busy. It's about feeling that those things have some meaning and
Yeah.
purpose
Yeah. That they're
in your life.
contributing to something beyond yourself, that they're in
Yes.
service of something kind of
Yes. Something
bigger.
bigger. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
I love that. I love that. I think, Catherine, we can come on to this idea. I love what you said about the interaction styles, and I'd love to know
Mm,
a little bit more. Like, I don't, it's not a model that I've ever heard of before, but I am
no.
curious about why some people get along better than other people. And like, as an individual, why is it that I like some people more than others,
Yeah.
or that some people just rub me up the wrong way?
Yeah. God, there's so much in those questions.
Sorry, it's a
So
big question, but
it is, yes, yes. So first of all, there are we're all very different.
mm,
And in my life, even as a youngster, I found there'd be people who I'd start off thinking, oh, I don't like them. And then, at school, for example. And then when you get to know them a bit better, you discover that you do like them.
mm,
So I think that sort of was an underlying thing at the back of my mind. Um, but basically, what the book is about, it's about four interaction styles, which I can explain if you'd like me to, but just leaving what those styles are aside for a moment. The basis of the book is knowing the difference between your intention when you're communicating and your impact. It's
yeah,
really about emotional intelligence.
mm,
So it's about that gap. So often we have a positive intention when we communicate. So with these four styles, each of them has, and it's all about communication. It's not about what you're doing when you're by yourself. It's all about when I'm with other people, when I'm interacting with other people, what am I doing? What is driving my behavior? So it's about being aware of what's driving your behavior, what's your intention, which may well be positive, but sometimes the way you come across can have a negative impact on the people that you're communicating with.
mm,
And then you don't have the influence you want to have
yeah,
on them. You don't have the connection, the influence, the relationship with them. So it's about being aware of, firstly, for yourself, that self awareness of, hang on, what's driving my behavior at the moment? How am I coming across?
mm,
And is that the best way I can come across in order to achieve my intention? But also for other people, if other people are annoying you or you're finding them irritating or whatever, it's trying to see beyond their immediate behavior that's annoying you to what is driving their behavior. So if I can give you I'll give you an example from Airbus, actually, because this is something that happens quite a lot. There are some people who are, well, I call them mobilizers. So their drive is to get action. They want to get results. They want to get quick action. So, for example, if you're manufacturing the wings of an Airbus aircraft and something goes wrong with the manufacturing process, you'll call in the engineers to come and fix it. The people that are in the manufacturing side tend to be that sort of mobilizer. Come on, quick, we've got
mm,
to get this sorted. We've got to get production going again. The engineers tend to have a different personality style that I call navigator. They want to go away and think about the problem. They want to come up with some potential solutions and evaluate them before you put any of them into action. Um, so they, so the mobilizer people come across as sort of impatient and demanding and let's
yeah,
get on with it. And when can you get this done by? The navigator people come across as, hey, whoa, slow down. Hang on. We're not rushing into this. I need to go away and think about this. And that causes a lot of conflict. But in
yeah,
fact, they've both got positive intentions because clearly
mm,
you want the manufacturing to get started and you want to get the right engineering solution to the
yeah,
problem.
yeah,
But because of the way they're coming across, conflict escalates quickly.
mm,
Whereas if they can both see, hang on, we've both got positive intentions, and if they can both moderate their behavior a little bit,
mm,
the mobilizers to calm down a bit and the navigators to actually say, for example, I need to go away and think about this. I'll get back to you at 5 o'clock with an answer.
yeah.
And that keeps the others happy. But it's that sort of lack of explanation,
It's
communication. So,
it's the bit in the middle. It's the
yes.
this is what I want, and this is how I'm going to make it happen, and
Yeah.
then the others are doing what they do best in order
Yeah.
to make what needs to happen. They're going away, they're not necessarily communicating back to say, this is what I'm doing, which would
Mm,
communicate that they're actually taking action in their own way.
mm,
And then it's kind of creating this cycle. When you
yeah.
mentioned the idea of intention versus impact, like what
Mm,
sprang to my mind is this idea that we tend to judge other people
Oh,
by the impact that they have or their actions or their behaviors. And we
yeah.
judge ourselves by our intention because we know what our intention was.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily, unless we're maybe scanning or very self aware, we don't necessarily know what that impact is of our intention, but we know the impact or the behaviors of other people on us, and that's how we judge them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We let ourselves off really. I might upset somebody and then it's like, oh, well, I didn't mean that. I didn't
Mm,
mean to do that. Um, so we judge, as you said, other people by their impact and we respond to that. Whereas we let ourselves off and we judge ourselves by what we intended to do,
yeah.
even though it's had a negative impact on the other person. I think that's a really important sort of self-awareness point for all of us, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That we
yeah,
tend to kind of judge other people. And I suppose for me, this communication layer is just, it's another layer in the, okay, so we all have needs and different people have different levels of different needs and we have unique needs. And what might frustrate one person would really light them up. We have different values that need to be upheld and behaviors that are expected. I think this communication piece and how we interact with each other is just another layer
mm,
that maybe makes things a bit more complicated for
mm.
human interactions, but also, like, I mean, I love frameworks and things. I love being able to understand this stuff and simplifying it. But it is just it's another layer, really, isn't it, of level of understanding of us and how we relate to the world.
Yes, it is. And I think that layer is what we see most.
Yeah.
At work, it's how we communicate with each other,
Mm.
whether it's verbally or email, by the way, because emails can cause lots of
Yes.
problems too.
Yeah.
In our families and our home lives or with our children, it's again the behavior, what we're saying, what we're doing. That's the level that
Mm.
this interaction styles model is trying to get at. This
Yeah.
framework is trying to say, even something simple like how we ask questions can annoy other people. So, if you and I were going out, maybe I'm waiting for you to be ready.
Yeah.
If I have a directing style of communication, I might say to you, Aoife, when are you going to be ready?
Mm.
If I have a more informing style, I might say, Aoife, how long are you going to be? And it's just that different
Yeah.
style of how we ask questions or how we make statements that can lead other people to, misinterpret what we really meant or
Yes.
can lead them to react negatively.
Yeah. I think it's really
Um,
interesting. And I'm also thinking that so this is the surface level, for want of a better word. This is what we
yeah,
see in our interactions every day, but
yeah,
actually they could be fundamentally guided by our core values
yeah,
and by our needs.
yeah,
Because what I say is when our needs are not satisfied, that's what causes frustration.
yes,
And again, thinking of something else and what I know about various different personality profiling, is there a difference between how I interact with people when I'm in a positive mood versus when I'm stressed? Like, is there something that changes fundamentally in how I interact in those two situations?
yes, and yes, I think there is. So if you're interacting and you have, as I said, this intention, you want to achieve something in this particular meeting or interaction, and that's not being honored as far as you're concerned or
Mm,
valued by the other person, then you emotions start to take over rather than
yeah,
your rational brain.
yeah,
You react emotionally. So, in the case of the mobilizer I was talking about, they're going to become impatient and demanding because you're
mm,
not valuing my need to get this problem sorted.
yes,
The navigator is going to become possibly a bit pedantic and a bit tense
yeah,
because they know they want to have a plan and want to think it through and don't want to get
yeah,
rushed and hurried. So yeah. So and the other two styles, just to give you a flavour of them, another one is energizer. So they
mm,
they are driven by the need to involve people and get people bought in. So they're the perfect people to organise the Christmas party, or to lead a team in a call centre. I mean, that
yeah.
doesn't mean you have to be that sort of person, but what I'm saying is in certain situations you can adopt that style. So,
Okay.
my natural style is probably isn't energizer, but if I'm hosting a party, then I will have that, you know, inclusive,
Yeah.
engaging, persuasive,
Yeah.
expressive style. If I'm at work and I'm making people redundant, I'm not going to be using that style. I'm going to be,
Mm.
hang on, right, we've got a plan. This is serious. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to be calm. I'm going to have that more of the navigator sort of style.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's lots of layers in these things, and there's lots of things that lead us to behave in certain ways. Personality is one of them.
Yeah.
And I, you know, and I love that field, and I've always worked in that field and so on. But it's not the only thing.
Yeah.
And we can and do flex our behavior.
Yeah.
And we do it without thinking often.
Mm.
But I think knowing about the interaction styles framework or other similar frameworks just helps you make more conscious choices.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that situational thing again. What's behavior is
What does
appropriate
this,
for this
yeah, what does
situation
this
or for
situation
this
call for?
person? Yeah. Or
Yeah.
what does this person need from
Yeah.
me?
And so, like, what you're saying basically is we have all four of the styles. We have a
Yeah.
dominant style that we use in our everyday interactions. And then we can flex those styles depending on the context, depending on the situation, and maybe even depending on the person. So you might
Yeah.
be a bit more careful if you're speaking to someone more senior in the organization, as an example. From
Mm-hmm.
what you're talking about and like the directing style and the kind of the more energizer type of people, it sounds very like disc. Is it
Yes.
related to it in a way, or
Yes.
yeah?
It is. And actually, one of my recent LinkedIn posts, I actually posted a mapping of how interaction styles and DISC and other models relate to each other. It is similar to DISC. And there's also a model called Social Styles, published by
Okay.
Bolton and Bolton, which is also similar. They're all about your behavior when you're interacting.
Yeah.
I prefer it to, I'm not qualified in DISC, so I'm speaking from a degree of ignorance here, and I admit that. But I do know a fair bit about it because I've worked with people who are. I prefer interaction styles for several reasons. One, because it does bring out this difference between a directing style and an informing style. It has these underlying preferences that helps you
Okay.
understand it better. So you've got these overall patterns, these
Yeah.
four patterns of behavior and the four things that are driving your behavior and what happens when you're a bit stressed. So there's that. But there's also some underlying tendencies that we have. One is that difference between being more directing or more informing in how we communicate.
Yeah.
And the other is introversion and extroversion. And I'm not sure that DISC brings out in quite the same way introversion and extroversion. I also personally have difficulty with some of the labels that DISC uses. So dominance, I think one is submissive. Well, they might call it steadfastness now. I think they used to call the S
Steady, steady.
submissiveness,
It's called
steadiness.
steady.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and I don't see myself in any of the disc things,
Mm.
and I find some of the language a little bit negative that are used
Okay.
to describe some of the styles,
Yeah.
whereas the interaction styles framework is ultimately based on the work of Jung. So it
Mm.
does, like Jung, you know, was the person who created or discovered introversion and extroversion. And I do think that that difference between people is a big part of how we judge other people
Yeah.
or why we find them annoying, you
Yeah.
know, in a meeting. So the extroverts get annoyed because the introverts aren't saying anything, and the introverts get upset because the extroverts are just dominating and you can't get a word in edgeways.
Yeah.
And a lot of, you know, the work that I've done in team building, we often will start with that basic difference. So basically, I'm saying that that comes out more clearly, I think, in the
Okay.
interaction styles framework
Yeah.
than it does in some of the others.
Yeah.
I think one of the something that people see as a downside of interaction styles is there is no questionnaire for it.
I was going to ask, how do people find
Yeah.
out? Do you just read like the different styles and then understand for yourself which is my dominating style, which is
Yes.
my predominant or which is
Yeah.
my
Yeah, your
preference or
typical, your
tendency?
sort of
Yeah.
default. I sometimes call it your tendency or your default style.
Yeah.
Yes, basically. So it was created by Linda Berens. So technically, it's known as Berens Interaction Styles.
Mm.
She wrote her first book on it in about 2000, 2001, something like that. She had worked for many years in the field of personality type, the stuff that's come out, you know, based the Myers-Briggs type indicator, insights, all these things are ultimately based on the work and ideas of Jung. She looked at this, she looked at social styles, she looked at William Marston's book, The Emotions of Normal People, that came out, I think, in the 1920s. So we're talking 100 years ago, and sort of synthesized all of this into this framework. She doesn't think you should have a questionnaire
Oh,
to
interesting.
assess. Yeah.
Yeah.
In my book, I do have some quizzes to
Mm.
help and different exercises to help you assess your style and those underlying preferences. And I have the descriptions, and yeah, it's reading, trying things out, observing, learning by exploring it really. And there's lots of little videos on my website actually that with examples of the styles. But Linda doesn't believe that you should use, well, that you should solely use questionnaires, because as you know, how you answer a questionnaire on a particular day is very
Yeah.
influenced by what's just happened, what's on your
Yeah.
mind, what's happened at work. Um, and however good and however well validated any questionnaire is, it's not going to cover every situation and every circumstances. How you interpret the words, the questions,
Yeah.
all reduce the sort of validity and reliability of
Yeah.
questionnaires. And that's
Yeah.
true of any, you know,
Yeah.
all the big five questionnaires, the NeoPI and all those
Yeah.
are, all subject to these problems, which is why it's fine to do a questionnaire, but then you really need a discussion with a qualified person to
To kind of,
explore
yeah, to
how
pick
does
it
this come
apart a little
out?
bit.
Yeah, pick it
Yeah.
apart.
Yeah.
Is how I came out on this questionnaire really me, or
Yeah.
actually am I a little bit different? And was I a little bit you really
Yeah.
need that one-to-one
The kind of the
debrief.
nuance with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Can
right.
we
And you
come
need
back to
to
this
read.
idea of the introversion versus extroversion? And when you're talking about the directing style versus the informing style, is that a difference between introverts and extroverts? And the other question, and kind of what came to my mind, and there's a podcast episode that's it's at the time of recording, I've recorded it already, but it's not out in the public
Hmm.
yet. But it's about seeking permission and how maybe we default to these behaviors of seeking permission from other people, whether they're more senior or we're in people pleasing mode. Like, is that more the informing style versus the directing? Like, I just love to unpick that a little bit.
Okay, so the first bit of your question, is directing and informing the same as introversion and extroversion? No.
Okay.
So there are four styles. Two of them are introverted, two of them are extroverted. Two, but not the same two, are directing, and two are informing.
Okay.
So when I was talking earlier about the mobilizer and the navigator, the let's get it done quickly versus let's have a plan, let's take our
Yeah.
time, they both have a directing style of communication,
Okay.
but they're different on introversion and extroversion.
Right.
Um, yeah, so it's not the same. It's like if you have four boxes, two are introverted, two on the top are introverted, two on the bottom are extroverted, two on the right are directing, two on the left are informing. If that makes sense. And
Yeah.
again, the people pleasing thing. Yeah, I think sometimes the people that naturally have the more informing style, so that would be
Yeah.
energizers and the one I call synthesizers, which I haven't mentioned so far, I think they can come across as people pleasing.
Hmm.
They are that both those styles have a higher proportion of types or people within them that are concerned about harmony, getting
Yeah.
on well with other people. So that need for
Hmm.
harmony. Whereas the people with the more directing style probably, on average, not
Hmm.
all, have a higher need for let's be task focused and let's get to the truth. So task versus people does align a little bit with directing and informing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But things are never completely simple. There's always little differences and exceptions and so on.
Yes, of
Which
course,
which
being
is
humans.
why which is why you have to take all these models with you have to take them lightly. I
Mm.
sometimes say to people, if you go to London, you go on the tube, you look at your tube map on your phone these days, the tube helps you get around, but that is not actually exactly how it is on the ground.
Yes, I just read
And it's,
this. Was it
yeah,
yesterday or the day before? Something that he said exactly that. Yeah.
yeah. So it's the same with interaction styles.
Mm.
They'll help you get around some of your relationships and particularly more self-awareness, but
Yeah.
it won't explain everything and cover every, little thing that can happen or that people
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Mm.
If there was one thing that you could offer people um, about how to get on with anyone, like a first step, what would that first step look like?
I think the first step is assume they have a positive intention,
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
so even if somebody, comes up to you and is annoyed, assume they have a positive intention. Second step is probably listening.
Mm,
What is it they're actually saying? And perhaps asking some of those open questions, well,
yeah.
what's made you think that? Or how are you feeling about that? Or, what else has been going on? Those. So yeah, assume positive intention, listen, ask open questions, and then look for where there's common ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
And particularly if it's people in your family or people that you work with, you're going to have to carry on. They're going to still be in your family and they're still going to be at work. So you don't want to have a big falling out with people, really.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find that common ground.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
really
and
I, I really like that approach. So it's kind of back on us. And I suppose another question I have around this is if we have a default questioning style, so if we have the directing versus the informing
informing.
question style or way
Mm,
of are you ready yet versus how much longer do you think you'll be?
yeah.
Is there a way to become aware of what that is and maybe modify how we ask people
Mm,
questions?
yeah. I think probably as adults, most of us have learnt to do a bit of a blend of the
Okay.
directing and the informing. So one of the examples I use when I run workshops is if you're chairing a meeting and you want somebody to write the minutes, if you naturally have a directing style, you'll probably say something like, Aoife, can you write the minutes, please?
Mm.
That's very
Aoife,
directing.
you're writing the minutes today. It's not even a
Yeah,
question, it's more
it's
of a
not even a question.
command.
It's a
Yeah.
statement, it's a
Yeah.
command. My voice has gone down at the end of the sentence.
Mm.
If I naturally have a more informing style, I'll probably say something like, oh, it would be useful to have minutes of this meeting
Who
and
no one puts
wait.
their hand up.
Exactly. No one puts their hand up.
Yeah.
So actually, that blended style in the middle, oh, it'd be useful to have minutes. Aoife, would you do it today, please?
Yeah.
Is probably, and I think we learn that by osmosis, really,
Yeah, what's worked
through
in the past
experience.
versus what
Yes.
hasn't worked.
Yes.
I'd love also to come back to it's kind of touching on one of the questions that I asked earlier, and it's the default style versus when you get into stress. And so, do you change, for example, from okay, so I've been nice up to this point, and now I'm actually a bit angry, and I want to get my point across. So I'm going from unconsciously from an informing to a directing mode to get stuff done that I need done.
Yeah, I,
Is
I'm not
it like
sure. I don't
okay?
think so. I
Yeah.
think what tends to happen first is you become a more stereotyped version of
Oh,
yourself.
right. Okay. Yeah. It's just,
Yeah, it gets
yeah.
worse because
Yeah.
I don't know if you've come across the SDI, the Strength Deployment
Yeah. And
Inventory,
I think
based on the
that's
work of Elias
why
Porter.
I'm thinking of you
That's
go, yeah. And
Yeah, you
then,
almost go stronger into it and
yeah.
then maybe do something different.
Yeah.
Um, so typically, the navigator will avoid so if you go back to the Thomas Kilmann conflict inventory, the navigator will avoid, the
Hmm.
mobilizer will push and assert more and more.
Okay.
The energizer will probably look for a compromise, and
Hmm.
the synthesizer will probably accommodate or
Yeah.
look, roll over or
People
look like they're
pleasing. Yeah.
accommodating. Yeah.
Hmm.
And I actually have the synthesizing style myself. And what I know is that sometimes I might just decide I'm not going to bother arguing about this,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to do it.
Yes. Yeah. 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 So
I
it's
might
this,
look as though
you'll say, oh, yeah. Yeah. Or maybe
well,
you won't say one thing
I
or
might
the
just give
other, but
up.
you
Yeah.
just won't do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. I may
Yeah.
have tried to, and I
Yeah.
will try to persuade them,
Yeah.
try to put in counter arguments, try to put my point across. But ultimately, if I think, no, this is the wrong thing to do, and I haven't been able to persuade them otherwise, I may just
Yeah.
accommodate with or appear to accommodate, might just
Yeah.
leave it.
But I
It's
think
not
it's
that
it's
important.
important to do that because I think I maybe have a touch of that style as well. And but it's important because the person who's asked you to do it is going to get even more pissed off basically, aren't they?
Mm, mm.
If you're not doing it, but you haven't said no, I'm not doing it. You haven't been
Yeah, yeah.
direct and said no, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if somebody's specifically asked you to do something very specific, then
Mm.
yes, you have to say yes or no. But if it's more, oh, more of a debate,
Yeah, okay.
and I think we should all use the Google Drive instead of Microsoft, 365.
That old
But I
debate.
actually want, yeah, but I actually want to carry on using my Microsoft. So I might carry on using my
Yeah.
Microsoft stuff and just put the odd thing on the Google Drive.
Yeah,
It is,
okay.
I mean, I don't know if that's a good example or not, but yeah, it's those sorts of things really where there is
Okay.
that bit of flexibility.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting, I think, and I think it will hopefully help listeners to have a different perspective of whether it's conflict at work or how we communicate, or if there's someone who particularly annoys you, that you'll have more of an understanding of why that is, and maybe
Mm,
why you're the annoying person to someone else as
yeah,
well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
And as I said, that introversion extroversion thing is such a cause of conflict between people as well, or misunderstanding.
Yeah,
Misunderstanding,
yeah.
and another quick example if we've got time. So extroverts naturally they're comfortable talking over each other.
Mm.
Introverts assume that you take it in turns in a conversation,
Yeah.
so they patiently wait
So,
for their
yeah, so I'm an
turn.
introvert and I wait and there's no gap,
No,
or the conversation has moved on. It's been picked up by another
yes,
extrovert and it's moved on to a different topic. And I'm like, wait, I haven't had my chance to
yeah,
say what I wanted to say about what we just talked about. And it seems bad to kind of to bring it up a while later.
yeah,
And something that you've said just has enlightened me just now, that they're happy speaking over each other, whereas
yeah,
I would not be happy speaking over someone else.
no,
That's I'm waiting for, and I've learned this over time. It probably the level of gap has reduced a lot over time because I've realized that things move really quickly and I need to get in
you've got
there
to
if
get in.
there's a tiny, tiny gap. And I'm like, get in and
Yeah,
and say what it is I want to say.
yeah,
But yeah, like that is it's like definitely an area of frustration when I was working in those bigger
yes,
teams, that I'm like, I
yes,
don't have the opportunity to share what I
yes.
think.
Yes, and yes, and I'm exactly the same. But the interesting thing is the extroverts are thinking, what are they hiding? Why won't they say anything? They're making up all this stuff
Yeah,
about why they're not saying anything, but actually they're just not getting the chance to
yeah.
say something.
No, there's no
Yeah.
one handing them the mic to say,
No,
Aoife, what do
retort it.
you think? Or, did you have anything to add? And I mean, aside from the fact that we're processing it all inside our heads, whereas they're processing it, isn't this how it works? That they're
Yes.
processing as they speak. They're not
Yes.
thinking about what they're saying. They're speaking and it's
Yes. Yes. They're
processing
working
as
out.
it's,
Yeah, they're
yeah,
working out what they think as they're speaking. Whereas
yeah,
people who are naturally more introverted, and by the way, we're all a mixture. We all
yeah.
use some parts of our brain in the external
Mm,
world and some parts internally. We're all a mixture, but we tend to have a bias towards
lean
one
more
rather than the
towards one or the
other.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the introverts think first before they speak. But as you said, by the time they've worked out what they want to say, the conversation's moved on. I often find myself with friends saying, oh, you were talking about such and such just now. And I sort of but that must be so annoying for them that I'm bringing
Mm.
them back to something they think we've done that.
Yeah, 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 yeah. It's a really good point because again, thinking on the podcast specifically, I'll take notes and I'll remember stuff and I'll process it in my head and I'll be like, oh, Catherine, you remember that thing that you mentioned? I want to come back to that now. But
Mm,
it's making me think that if there are extroverts on the podcast, which chances are, like let's say half of all of my guests have been extroverts,
mm,
then they've moved on to a topic before I've had a chance to ask or follow up or process what they've said. And so
mm,
I'll actually bring them back to something that they said earlier.
yes. Yeah.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I'm sure that happens. But they might not
interesting.
mind because it might, bringing them back, they might, it gives them the chance to say a bit more about whatever it is,
Exactly.
doesn't
And
it?
for
So,
me,
yeah.
it's taken a deeper dive and it's my
Mm.
curiosity of like, well, we haven't touched on this aspect, or can you explain that a little bit more, or whatever it might be. Catherine, the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, what does being happier at work mean to you?
Well, for me personally, it means having enough time to do the things that really energize me. So I love my work as a coach. I love designing team building workshops and running them. Having enough time to do those, or when I was writing the books, I enjoy writing, having
Mm,
enough time. to do those things that energize me and not having too much of the stuff that drains me. So for me, that's, IT going wrong or lots of admin or, unexpected interruptions when you're in the middle of something really important. So I think, I mean, those are me personally, though generally I would say to other people, be aware of what energizes you, what
Mm.
tasks or activities make you feel good
Yeah.
about yourself. I'm enjoying this and I'm doing it well, and I'm feeling great. And try and manage your work or your life to get enough time to do those things.
Mm.
Otherwise, you'll feel so frustrated that you're not doing those if you're spending far too much of your time on the other things, the things that drain you. So that's my basic. So I mean, every job has stuff that's annoying or, that you don't like doing. So it's not about doing all the energizing stuff all the time, but it's having that balance, more of the energizing stuff and less of the draining stuff.
Mm. I
And on
love that.
self-determination theory, they talk about it leading to well-being. If you can meet those needs
Yeah.
and do more of what energizes you and less of what drains you, you have greater well-being and
Mm.
happiness at work too.
Yes, I love
Yeah.
it. And if people want to connect with you, if they want to find out more about your books, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, quite active on LinkedIn, so should be easy to find me there. And my website, it's www.essenwood, E-S-S for sugar, enwood.co.uk. There's lots of information there about my books and about my other work, and lots of little videos and downloadable resources and templates, and stuff, workbooks that accompany the books. They're completely free to download because I really do want to share some of this knowledge more widely, because I do think it helps people feel happier in themselves and lead happier lives. So
Mm.
shouldn't be too hard to find me. And obviously my books are on Amazon and in all good bookshops.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine. I really, really enjoyed the conversation today.
Me too. Thanks, Aoife, for inviting me.